Good morning. Wow. You can tell that I've only woke up an hour ago. How's everyone doing?
Hello.
Doing great.
You're here early. Are you going to leave for your stand-up, Stephen?
About 9:30, 9:35.
Are you going to come back after?
Yeah, I can come back. I can come back after my stand-up.
Okay. Yeah, and then we'll do the operator discussion with Troy. Cool. All right. As people cycle in, since we have some new people, I'm just going to point out that we have the HackMD. If you sign into HackMD, you can add your name to the meeting notes. And then I always encourage people to write down your own meeting notes as much as you can, because I will forget because I will be paying attention. And then it'll just be like a blank dot where I meant to type something and I didn't. Cool. Let's see. Troy, what did we want to talk about today? We can continue the conversation in Slack about resources and uninstall versus delete, or did you have something on top of mind?
I didn't add anything to the agenda. Apologies. I was working this the thing with the PR that I have up, and then the bug that kind of works, but it's not really a bug because it isn't really a bug, but should it be a bug? And then trying to do the kind stuff with the Porter install stuff. So I didn't know where we wanted to go. I was actually trying to get more clarity around the output stuff, because it sounds, with the operator, the operator want to have the installation outputs.
When you say that, are you talking about what Cynthia brought up today?
No, the operator V1 issue, I think it's 53, 64.
Oh, the outputs, API outputs with the gRPC server. Yeah, if
right.
Steven's here, we could talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I know he has to run too, right? So we can, I question it because I know initially when I talked about this stuff, the last community meeting, I think we talked about that it is a wrapper around Porter CLI. So Porter CLI is actually going to be the thing that does the commands, but then you need to get those commands back to the installation CR to be able to be outputted. And we were going to use a CR to do that, but then we wanted to make a service that we were going to ship alongside of it. But if we have to still get the output from that Porter CLI, is it necessary to then serve that content in a gRPC server when we want to create an installation CR that goes along with it? And I think I'm kind of confused with, I think we talked about why we need it, but then it was, I was trying to take the Porter CLI away from the operator, but then I think it's necessary because of the agent config that is each version of the Porter CLI that gets thrown into the operator at that point. But, and that's another discussion, do we want to schedule jobs every time we do this, which it sounds like we do, because that's kind of how it works currently. But again, I was wondering, is it still necessary to do the gRPC server, being that the output we get from the job that's kind of created to do the outputs has to be parsed or given back to the user, and it is an installation CR? And what does the gRPC server add to that complexity around us having to serve that content? Because we still, even if you hit the, go ahead.
Well, so there's a couple different layers here to this. So it's a matter of where do we actually run the Porter client object. So if we want the Porter client to be run inside the operator, that's a different discussion. If we want the Porter client to be run inside of a job, then and we're doing that right now via the Porter CLI, essentially just wrapped inside of a job. We have to translate the objects inside Porter into something the operator can understand. And so what we were previously doing was literally just taking and running an agent action that had a Porter installation output show -I installation name, -JSON, and spitting that out to just the job logs. And then we were parsing the job logs, extracting the JSON from that text, and then marshaling that into an object that we could understand. And we were using that outside of the operator. But it's a matter of operator needs to know the outputs. How does operator find out about those outputs? We looked into having the operator also parse the job logs, essentially take and run a job and then read those logs in and then parse that, but that's just really error prone. So basically we have two options. Either have a long-lived Porter client that's able to interact via some kind of API. We chose gRPC instead of REST or whatever, because gRPC just happens to be used throughout the Porter internals, and it just felt like a more natural API to use, as well as somebody had actually requested a essentially run the Porter CLI, but as a long-lived service. So it was kind of kill two birds with one stone. People want to run Porter as a service and run it as a gRPC API. Oh, we can also deploy that alongside the operator and expose whatever functionality of the Porter service that we want to API endpoints. And the operator can talk to it via gRPC or whatever it is. So it was a matter of keeping the operator away from the complexity of Porter and more focused on the complexity of the CRDs and, you know, the Kubernetes ecosystem, and then expanding the Porter service itself to be multifunctional. So to serve as something inside of the operator that can do some of the more complex Porter side operations that we don't necessarily want to code into the operator, as well as expand the functionality of running Porter as a service just directly outside of, you know, not necessarily as the operator, but you could just have a Porter service command that runs a long-lived API for Porter. So that was kind of the thought process and the direction that we went down.
Okay, because I still have some questions around that, because like you still have to
Sure.
use Porter CLI to surface that information, whether you, right? And that's gonna either be exposed via CR that we create, or gRPC servers, or even the output of the logs that you want to use. I think I'm struggling to understand, and forgive me for keep asking maybe the same question over and over again, but more so like the idea behind if we want to have Porter as a long-lived service, to not abstract the functionality that exists with the CLI into the operator itself, because those things. So for instance, I don't want to have a pod that just runs Porter CLI to do the things that I probably can do in the Porter operator itself to have that functionality. So I think what I'm saying is, rather than having 3 different components to do the one thing that Porter on the side would do locally on your machine, because I have that now, I have to install the operator. The operator is going to run the Porter CLI job. The Porter CLI job is then going to be able to surface all that information to the gRPC server, that I probably could just run kubectl, get the installation, and get all the information that I need from that, which would then be the CR that's stored in the state for, because like, for instance, Mongo is going to, running the Porter CLI, you're going to need to run the state. There's a state store for Mongo, I mean, for Porter CLI. There's a state store for Kubernetes. Then you have like these conflicting things. And then there's a gRPC that's going to be able to hit this API and hopefully resolve it in a cache or something like that. So to get the latest and greatest thing that you want to expose via the API, I'm trying to reduce the surface of all of that by saying, do we need all those different things to achieve the same goal of what we want to have with, excuse me, with Porter as a service for an instance?
Yeah. So we keep talking about achieving the same goal, but remember, one of the goals is its current behavior is that you can change the version of Porter you're using. So that's an operator decision, user operator decision of what version of Porter to be configuring the Porter operator to be using. Are we still keeping that use case in mind with ideas of refactoring and re-architecture? And I just want to make sure that, like, whatever current behaviors we lose with a re-architecture, we're consciously saying we're going to lose those behaviors and not accidentally lose them.
No, and I don't disagree with that, Brian. I think
Yeah.
My ask around adding the additional complexity to what Porter operator does currently, it sounds like something that is kind of migrating away from that spirit in an instance, because like it's supposed to wrap the CLI in a place where it could become this thing, right? And you can just ask the Porter operator to give you installations, and then it'll run the job to find installations in the Porter CLI zone store, and then give it back to you in a consumable resource as a Kubernetes object, right? And then if writing a gRPC service around that abstraction is then something else that needs to be shipped and then be able to still do, if that makes sense. Because if I hit the endpoint for the gRPC server, I'm still going to have to run the Kubernetes job to get the outputs I need to then come back to the gRPC server as a response to say this is what it is.
No. The fetching of the outputs does not kick off a job. So the job is the installation.
Okay, so the installation is the job.
Yeah, the operator itself can then just query the API to get additional
in the
information
operator.
without, in the operator,
Yeah. So the gRPC
without
is a
having to
data.
kick off another job. And that's
Right,
the
the
more we
gRPC
put into the gRPC server, the more we create that ability to not spin off jobs to do everything.
Yeah, exactly. So the gRPC server is a data only API that essentially is like it knows about the installations that are out there, and it can just talk to the outputs backing store directly without kicking off a job. So the operator talks to the gRPC server instead of the operator kicking off a job and having it list the outputs. We can just directly get those straight out of gRPC. And I have to drop. I will be back here in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. All right, so let me get this straight. The job is only kicked off once for the initial installation. Is it then updated for any update of that installation?
Well, the installation resource updates with the status. Yes.
Okay. So I think I saw in the issue that we want to, at the end of the installation resource completion, we want to then create the installation's output CR.
Yeah.
Is that still true? Okay.
That was one, that was an opt-in feature that we were talking about.
Right, you put an annotation on there and then it creates a CR, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So say that doesn't exist, right? Because they didn't opt in, but they still want the outputs. Do they have to run the job again to get that outputs for them to get that installation that's already installed? I'm trying to find the source of truth, which would be the
well, you're talking about, so now we're getting into a design of new behavior. So what is the behavior we want, right? Yeah. So if you're saying, okay, we have an installation resource, it's been applied, an installation has happened, and it got to a successful state. And now we're saying a user comes in after the fact and puts on an annotation on that installation resource saying, yeah, I really do want outputs. That still seems like something where as soon as we see that change in annotation, we're able to query the gRPC API and then create a new output CR with that information for the user. I don't think
that doesn't exist yet, right? Because you don't have
no.
outputs.
I said we're getting into new behavior, right?
Yeah, because what I would assume, right? Like say for instance, you're doing what you're saying, right? And we add the annotation to the actual installation CR that exists. It's going to kick off the reconciler. Reconciler is going to say, oh, I have this thing. I have to run a new job because this is what's supposed to get created at the end of the job. The Porter CLI should say this already exists. If you want the outputs, I can give you that. Right? Like,
I would think I wouldn't expect it to kick off a new job.
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't kick, but wouldn't it? Because it can't get the outputs unless the installation.
It's querying the gRPC service that's running alongside like if we have a long-lived gRPC service running in the operator for that version of Porter that's configured for that namespace, then we're able to, we have this long-lived gRPC service, and then that reconcile loop can just go query that read-only information as needed.
But when that doesn't exist yet, is what I'm saying.
You're right. Yeah, we're talking about future functionality, right? All of this, there's no output CR. There's none of this exists yet.
Right. You gonna say something, Sarah?
No. Oh, yeah.
No, I thought Sarah was gonna say something. She looked like
I've been letting you two go.
No, and I don't want to, and hopefully this doesn't make me seem like I'm I'm really
right. This is all we're getting to a mutual understanding, right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on, especially when there's like 3 PRs that I'm working through and then work, right? But anyway, okay, so it sounds like And this would be, I think this is kind of what the behavior we're wishing to drive, right? So with what you just described, right? If they didn't opt into this installation output CR, right? But they want to see it later because they then did opt in, that CR would already be created because we did it anyway, but you just didn't see it because you didn't know that it was opt-in. Because it would not be able to get surfaced to the gRPC service unless that CR was created at the end of an installation to then get triggered as a data read-only situation.
Yeah. So we're
Okay.
getting into like the what if
that's
there isn't
implementation
an
though.
output CR.
Yeah.
And like one of, we never talked about exposing an API to end users at all. Like this is supposed to be initially an internally consumed gRPC API. And I would not necessarily expect users to run their own gRPC service on the side and query that directly.
Right.
I personally am more of a fan of having an output CR as you can control whether it's creates one or not, but that's the only way to get the information is via an output CR. That seems more in line with the Kubernetes native.
Right. I was going to say, because
goals we're going for, right?
Even if you were going to say, hey, I would, you know what, I'm just going to put the outputs on the actual installation CR in the part like the conditions or something like that, you could do that as well, right? But having its own separate thing, I agree, kind of like continues the life cycle of what an installation is, because it will then be able to update the installation output CR if something changes in the status of the installation will always stay with the installation, right? Yeah. So I don't disagree there. I think that's perfect, and it's whiteboarding, right? So it's a whole bunch of stuff going on right now. So like you see me like writing down, it's because that's what it is. No, I think this helps in the direction because there's a lot of history around this situation that I'm unaware of. So I think that's kind of why if I'm digging into the questions around this space is because
I'll be honest too. There's a lot of information that I'm not aware of too. Like I am not familiar with some of the internal Microsoft use cases, and so I've never seen a clear list of those. So I'm trying to channel past the history of conversations here a little bit, and I can speak to our use cases that Stephen and I had, but I can't speak to the history of some of the Microsoft use cases that were driving some of this behavior previously.
Gotcha. Okay.
To your benefit, Troy, I literally have had Brian and Stephen go over like the gRPC service like 5 times with me at least, the same like conversation where I was like, I just need to make sure I understand. So
a couple more of these and
remember, you got to ring that bell like 7 times before it's heard, right? So we'll go over it as much as we need to. So.
Okay, but yeah, I think that helps with at least the initial infrastructure, right? Like I think the next step would have to be, hey, create the installation CR, and then generate the things that come along with it, right? And then like at the end of each installation, we can actually create an installations output CR by getting the outputs of that stuff, right? I know we're still parsing it through the job logs. I was hoping that there's a way we can not do that.
Well, we won't have. That's the whole point of the gRPC service. That means no job logs. So if we have for every like off the cuff here a little bit, like, but basically we already descoped where your porter config can be when configuring the operator, because that used to be like a per installation porter config potentially. We got rid of that, and so now you can only have a porter config at the namespace level. So now that we have a porter config at the namespace level, and that's going to say what version of porter are you using and what data store is that porter going to for secrets and for installation data store, right? So that's going to be a per Kubernetes namespace. So now that we know the porter version, the data store, the config, everything in the config per namespace, now you have the potential to say, okay, well, let's fire up the correct version of the gRPC service for that namespace as well. And then when you have the operator managing multiple namespaces that have potentially multiple versions of or different version of porter per namespace, we can potentially have a gRPC service that correlates to that as well. And maybe there's other routes to do that sort of thing. Maybe we can look into having versioning in the API that corresponds to Porter versions or namespaces, etc. I think there's a little bit of API footprint that needs to be thought of in regards to some of that. But at the very least, you know, that allows us to kind of keep that behavior of the user operator has the ability to say what version of Porter they're using, and we get them the correct version of the gRPC API, and then the operator is just querying that gRPC API to get all that extra info. There's no, once you've run your installation job, that should be the only job that's run.
I'm gonna cut off Troy really quick to go on a side tangent that he probably doesn't remember we need to do, which is you brought up namespaces, and Troy and I, I forgot that Porter has its own concept of namespaces, and Brian,
I was
here,
talking Kubernetes namespace.
I know, I was
Porter
gonna
namespace is not true. You're right. Yeah.
Right. So two questions here, which you might not know, which you might know the answer of, or like save us some code deep diving, which was in the operator. When we run the operator, is it kube namespace and Porter namespace, or do we get rid of? So can we have
I think you're gonna have multiple different Porter namespaces within a Kubernetes namespace right now. I could be wrong. I'm a little foggy. I've been doing other things.
No, you're good.
But I think that's the case. And even that, that's a tough pill to swallow. I would love to reverse engineer the use cases out of that to see how necessary that is. And that actually is why we came to the conclusion to get rid of such fine-grained Porter config control. It's because at the end of the day, we're like, no, that just makes it too fine-grained.
Yeah, and then I was checking Troy because basically when we did the params update, I noticed that he removed the namespaces field, and I was like, oh, Troy doesn't know that Porter has the concept of its own namespaces, but also we don't document that anywhere. Which I mean, I know the website is kind of it
used
rough.
to be, but yeah,
it might be.
I hear you.
It's not clear,
right.
And so it's okay. So my understanding, I'm just running this by you just to make sure I'm completely sane, is Porter namespaces are probably similar to Kubernetes namespaces, where per installation, each installation would have a namespace that encapsulates all of our secrets and params and the installation stuff itself. And then I'm gonna guess Porter itself has its own namespace for any Porter stuff, right?
Yeah, and that is really the Porter namespace is the way I think of them it's all about precedence to find your default values for things. And so within a single, you'll have to fact check me on this, but I believe within a single Porter config, you can have different namespaces in that config, and even those. I don't think you can have a different data store at that level. I think it's all namespaced within the same data store, but it's definitely the use case we always talked about in the past was there's a team-based namespace, so you can give different teams different Porter namespaces so that it can go to team A's secret store for credentials for a cloud, or team B's credentials for a cloud store, but then you can have high-level defaults that if it doesn't find them within your namespace, your Porter namespace, it's going to roll up to the default namespace and go get additional values. So you can have parameters at the default namespace level that team A and B would both use, but team A and B have different credentials that they're using to actually run them because those are in their namespace.
That makes sense. Okay. That's just a whole nother layer of complexity.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that over here.
When I was first working on all this, I was like, oh, wouldn't it just be nice if Porter namespace equaled Kubernetes namespace, and it was just that simple, and it's not that simple.
No, and I'd love to map that logic, but I know that would mess up how Porter thinks of itself and how it executes.
Yeah, I think it is worth looking at that too, because I mean, really, there is a question to be asked of, what would a user want to configure at the Kubernetes namespace level versus the Porter namespace level? And I could see that wanting to be a little bit more simplified than it is right now.
Yeah, no, and I agree. It's like,
You know, I mean, there's so many different ways namespacing in Kubernetes can be used operationally that, and so it'd be kind of wanting to have an understanding of what namespace conventions are being used where the operator is being deployed to, what
Yeah.
Kubernetes namespace conventions are being used.
that makes sense. It's one of those things where it's like, we should find out if people are actually using it and how they're using it, and then,
Yeah.
make it better.
Yeah. If the primary 80% case or 90% case is, oh, we just run the operator in its own Porter ops namespace in Kubernetes and that's it, then that greatly simplifies things.
Right, exactly. I was going to talk about install, delete, uninstall, delete. There we go. But unless Troy or Alan's here, and I can also introduce Ludwig, which I'll probably forget, so we should probably do that. But if you two had anything before I go off.
No, I
No.
didn't have anything else besides
Cool.
the secret thing that I think we were discussing that I feel like it's gonna work
Do you
itself
want
out. I
to?
don't know.
Okay, so we're gonna sidetrack. We'll do secrets and then we'll do uninstall. There's been a lot to talk about lately. So first off, Ludwig, we got a new hire, a new grad at Microsoft. He is on the Porter team now, and so he will be around on the internet. He has his first PR up. Ludwig, would you like to say anything?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ludwig. Nice to meet all of you. I'm excited to work on Porter. Just trying to figure out what it is exactly.
Us too, don't worry. I'm kidding. It takes a while. You'll get to it. So, all right, let's talk about secrets. I'm gonna go on my soapbox about secrets, and then everyone could kind of like tear me down on why logic. So I understand that showing secrets name, which is not secrets value, secrets name, is a functionality that we had previously to updating the params, and that is in the test. My only worry is that it would be a foot gun for users or large companies who do like secret name, and it's like it kind of like it might show prefixes and things like that. And so what I would like to do is hide it behind a flag. And Troy's point was that like basically people won't be able to resolve their secrets if we don't show secret names. And I can get that, but I'm also low key like, it's in your secret store. Like if I have Vault, then I should know how to get my secrets out of Vault. But I guess it shows that we're like actually mapping to something, I guess. I don't know. So I get kind of like uppity about like I'm not super great at security, so I don't know where like the lines in the sands are drawn. Troy, you got vibes?
Sorry,
Alan?
no. I couldn't unmute for some strange reason. And
Okay.
I think so. Like again, I don't really know the historical context from why we were displaying it in other formats. I think I was just fixing the initial print params list wasn't working. So when I fixed that is when I was like, oh, okay, the environment variables we want to show. We don't want to show secrets, but we are showing secrets in other formats. So when we do like Porter param show Porter hello, dash o YAML or something like that, you still see the secrets. You see them in JSON. You never show them in, and you see them in plain text. But when you do like Porter params list, that output wasn't working functionally at one point. So then when I fixed that is when I came across that. So I don't believe we would have kept it this long if that decision wasn't made before I started working on the list problem. So that's just from a historical context. I don't believe that we would have never gotten that far, in my opinion. The second part is if we want to kind of redact that behavior going forward, people picking up the new version of Porter are not going to have the same functionality that existed before, and may expect the output of the secrets to be able to do some automation within their pipeline with how they use Porter, right? So I didn't want to reduce that functionality that exists, but fix the problem of the listing situation. Now, again, if we want to revisit this from a place of, we should fix this because this is probably not a good idea to expose this, even though the person who installed it probably should understand that they have the opportunity and believe to see the secrets, maybe it's something that we want to say like, hey, going forward, we will show you the secrets, but if you want to make sure that your outputs can be redacted in a way where the secrets is not surfaced at this level, we can do some hidden value trick where you pass in this situation that doesn't expose that, or create another command from our because sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just jumped back in. I want to clarify. So you're seeing the secrets related to an installation being exposed in the outputs when you do a list of like the parameters, or when you do the list of the outputs?
We're seeing secret names. So what happens is when we
Secret
do
names, yes.
secret
Yes.
names, not the
Yeah,
values.
that's okay. Yeah, that's purposeful.
So do you feel, as like you've worked in like system side and we're more of like just like the apps usage. Do you feel like that is like, I feel, or I should say this, I feel that like it could be a foot gun for users. Like people could like add prefixes and stuff to their secret stores and their secret names. And then that could like be a potential vector for like bad actors,
So
right?
I'll tell
Or
you,
no?
I'll tell you how we use this internally at F5, because this is exact, like as soon as we saw that we were doing this without Porter, and then we saw Porter did this, and we're like, great, that's exactly how we solve this problem. So customer comes to us and they say, I need a database in the cloud. Okay. And then we say, okay, cool. Here's a key vault. Here's the secret name for you to fetch the connection string out of that key vault. And we had to come up with multiple layers of like Terraform to solve this problem. But that's how we said, okay, we did this installation on your behalf. We want to share the usage of this with you. Let's give you the name of the secret that you can actually go and do it. So it wasn't like I am a high-powered Porter user and I know what my key vault looks like and I want to make sure that my secret names aren't exposed. It's like, how do I let a customer who I'm doing this Porter behavior on their behalf use the installation? Like this is a usability thing, not like a sysadmin thing, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. So yeah, maybe it's not that big of a deal. My whole thing was I was worried about it becoming like a user foot gun, and I'm getting like, people telling me that I have like a.
I think there's definitely a case for that. And so like what we did is we would put, just like as at F5 in terms of our security policy, when we were creating key vault secrets, we would put some kind of prefix or suffix on it that would make it unique, right? So this isn't like database connection string. This is like ABCD database connection string. And then if somebody was able to scrape our key vaults, they would have to know the key as well. But for sharing that key name to the user who requested that, it's okay that they know that secret name, but that secret name is unique for that installation. And it's not something that like all Porter installations of databases have this exact secret name on it, right?
Right.
So that might be something that we think about, and how do we solve that? Because I think right now it says, I think we do, I can't remember specifically how that's created, but we do create like a static secret name based off the outputs name, if I remember correctly.
Sorry, I have a person at my phone. I think for at least some of them, we add like unique identifiers. At least that's what I was seeing when I was looking through the params list. And so I think maybe that's the case for like these default secrets that we need to have. Default secrets that we don't have. It's like maybe we can just add. Is that bad? No, we can't do that. Never mind.
Maybe have
Never mind.
an option or something like that where we can do it, but like allowing those secret names, because that makes it to where an installation is usable, right? Like assume that you're running Porter on the behalf of someone else. How would you let them use the installation that you just created for them?
mean, in that case, then creating these like unique prefixes to like whatever they want to name things is a feature, because then it takes
Yeah,
less work
exactly.
off of my users. So yeah, maybe I could see that being a feature. And then like we kind of like slide by the security issues and then people are happy. So okay, writing that down. And then the last thing, 2 secret names. So for right now, I'm fine, Troy, like Alan, keeping the current use case, and then we will just create a feature to add those UUIDs or unique identifiers as prefixes, and then we kind of get away with, you know, get out of my like, oh, we're adding a foot gun headspace. The last thing was Cynthia's conversation, which is where we were talking about item potencies, installs, uninstalls, deletes, and then basically coming up with like, okay, if I uninstall, what are the use cases I want to keep this information in the database? And when I reinstall, I want it to be as idempotent as possible, which means I probably want versions, I'm gonna guess. How do people feel about that?
Uninstall is weird because delete, I would expect, you know, installation's gone. Uninstall I would assume. I don't know what case you would want to keep an uninstall around. Like I look at it from what the word means from a perspective of, like, if you do, I'll use Terraform, right? Terraform up, it's up there, right? You know, you destroy it, it's gone, right? Well, I mean, I don't use that. I'll use Windows, right? So like, so like, if you uninstall whatever app that you don't like anymore, it's gone, right? There's a history of it being uninstalled and you having installed it, right, from audit purposes and stuff like that. But if you reinstall it again, it would install it again, right? If you were to install Go on your laptop, you have Go. If you uninstall it, you don't have Go. It showed that you uninstalled it. You can't use it anymore. There's a history of it being there. But if you were to install Go again, you can now have that installation overwrite what was supposed to, I guess, not be there. So if you delete Go from your computer, same situation. So I think that's kind of my interpretation of the terms to wave my hand, you can't see me. I think that's my interpretation of the terms when it comes to those things, right? So like delete. So like if you need the historical situation where you uninstall and see that this was once there before, then uninstall would say, okay, I can still install over the new thing, but whatever that means, I could just have like a history of it was installed here, uninstalled, and then we installed it again. Delete would be like it's here and then we deleted it. So maybe that's the state you want to keep in Mongo to show that, but it shouldn't wreck what's available to be done in a case of install and reinstall and delete. Like I think those actions in itself should be able to be performative in the way that they're designed to be as terms, in my opinion. But again, I don't know if that's the case we have.
Yeah, I kind of view it a little differently, that the installation CR is saying we have the ability to have this thing deployed. It can be in an install state, it can be upgrade, it can be uninstalled. It's a separate, you know, and it's the installation CR that's the record. It's not the thing, it's the record of the thing, and it's a declarative state of what you want it to be in. You know, again, I think this comes down to what the operators, the users' needs are. Do they need a history of what has been installed? Or is it just, do they expect that installation resource to only be there when the bundle has been installed? And then what does upgrade mean as well on top of that? So to me, the Kubernetes resource, the CR, is the control point for what you want done. And then the install, uninstall, upgrade, even running a custom action, those are just different states of that installation CR. You know, I'm when I think of the idea of let me delete my installation CR, and I expect it to uninstall what I've deployed into, you know, that is a couple of things. Like, who knows how long an uninstall takes. So it's not like it's an instantaneous thing. And then there's all the failure states of an install as well. So just, you know, deleting, I want to understand better what that expectation is when you try to delete an installation CR and your uninstall process for the bundle takes an hour. And it fails, you know.
Yeah. I feel like that makes I don't know. I'm on the case of keeping the install data.
And I don't advocate anyone having a bundle that takes an hour to uninstall, but out of my hands.
No, I mean, I remember it used to be such a big deal to have like a Docker container that was over like 250 megabytes or something like that. Like people now have like multiple gigabytes of Docker containers. So I'm totally for it. I mean, there was the whole case of like during dependencies having rollbacks no matter what step in the process of like an install you are. So if it like failed, we would like have logic of like what step you are, and then you could like choose that. And anyway, so that was a thing, and it's on the board of a to-do. That being said, yeah, I feel like keeping the data for an install, like I can see the use case of like uninstall, but I still keep some data around for you to have. And delete means I wipe off everything ever. And I
like you can have a query that says, give me a list of all installations that are uninstalled and successful uninstalled. Purge all those out. But or even having it, we talked about like a TTL on them so that they automatically purge after successful uninstall after a while or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, but the only way we're going to have like that item potency, which like you uninstall and it uninstalls successfully and I can reinstall it, and like those types of things, I feel like we're only going to be able to do if we start adding like versionings, or we do it off of timestamp. But I'm going to guess in Mongo, like the name of an install is just the name. So I'd have to append a version onto that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, it could be there's a nuke from orbit workflow of mark that CR as uninstalled, wait for it to get successful, and then mark it as install again, because I want to just hit the reset button on a deployment.
Well, but see, here's the thing that I ran into with Carolyn just first part of the year was like I tried to uninstall something and it failed, and then you can't uninstall it again because a failed uninstall is like this weird state. So like we need to think about what's the FSM around the different install, upgrade, uninstall, and custom actions, and how do you transition between them? Because like if you have, like, for example, you install something and it fails, do you want to be able to, if you're doing like Terraform, you may have partial state out there. So if you redo an install and you have things that have already been created that may match naming conventions or whatever, you could have, you know, either orphan cloud resources or cloud resources that are now colliding with things. So this is kind of a complex workflow problem, I think, that needs to be better defined, especially on the failure modes.
I can see that. Yeah, and if you uninstall and you fail, and then how do we go into like I actually want to nuke that kind of state? Yeah, and I mean, Alan just brought up, oh god.
Well, like you uninstall something, and you know sometimes cloud APIs time out, and you just retry and uninstall. Like I've done so many times. I do a Terraform destroy, and sometimes it just doesn't work, and you do it again, and it works, and that's just kind of expected. So like, should you be able to retry and uninstall after you have a failed uninstall? Do you have to reinstall and then uninstall? Like what's that kind of workflow? You need to know what the state of the installation is. And if you think of an installation as its own resource and uninstall as an action you take against that resource, and that doesn't remove your record of the resource, right? That's just a state that resource is now in. Now, we could potentially, I brought this up in the chat, but add a Porter delete installation. And I don't even know if that's in there. If it's not, we probably should, because that's a good thing to have. It's like, you know what, I'm done with everything related to this installation. Let's remove all memory of it. We should be able to do that. And I don't know that we do. And I guess my opinion would be like from the Kubernetes side, if I do a kubectl delete, like that would also do everything else, delete that record from the backing stores. So I think that's a valid use case. It's just a matter of when does that happen and how do we make sure we don't do that unintentionally, because that shouldn't be just a side effect of an installation a side effect of doing an uninstall is deleting the record for it as well.
Okay. Alan brought up a good point, which is that we should try to soft delete. So we do have Porter installations delete. And I'm wondering, like, if we wanted to do like a hard delete, I'm thinking we do like a --f. And like, there you go. Like that is like, we've tried and we're wiping everything. And I'm fine with that. Oh, great. I accidentally deleted all my installations. Anyways, that's fine. So we do have that, and we could do that and add like a force flag. The hard part, I agree with you, Stephen, is that we need to create like an FSM and write down a model for like all of these different like failure modes and how we're going to handle them. And the only like thing right now I'm at is that users are going to uninstall, like in debugging, uninstall these installations and then try and reinstall and see what happens. And they're going to see that it fails, and that's not like an expected outcome. So I'm trying to think of like the path of least resistance to doing what users want or expect, I guess is the best way to say it.
Now add in dependencies.
It's we are I know. I've been thinking this whole conversation, I've been thinking about how literally that there's the whole point in dependencies about the steps. I just brought it up, the steps and how we're going to do rollbacks at different points in installations that I'm like, I can't, no. That is for next year, Sarah. But for this year, Sarah, I know adding versioning is such a not fun thing, but it seems like for more people to adopt Porter, versions would be really helpful. And I know that versions of installations and adding dependencies is it's gonna be a like future issue for me. But it feels like, I don't know, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that people want to be able to do this kind of feature and versions would help it. Or I'm wrong, which is fair. Also, Alan brought up that they deleted some params with Porter params delete, and they just kept showing up. And I'm wondering if they're in like a different namespace and that's why, but also that's like, feel free to make an issue and like, we'll go look at it. And we can try it after this call too, because that should not be happening. Maybe.
Yeah, I would expect, just from a user standpoint, like if I do go delete this thing, that delete means it's bye-bye, go take it away. I don't ever want to see record of this again. I'm consciously saying go away.
Yeah.
So
like I don't need the hand holding, right? Like I know what I'm doing as a user kind of thing, right?
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my opinion, and Brian and Troy, you guys might disagree, but like my opinion is, if we're doing a delete of the installation resource from Kubernetes, that we should also be doing a delete of the Porter installation, because we're consciously saying this record, I just want to go away. I don't want to work with it anymore. It needs to be out of my Porter ecosystem completely.
I agree. Anything that is represented in the CR, if it's deleted, should also be deleted for what it represents. Like that mapping should, because it exists, should also follow the same trend.
But that's where we need to make sure that our finalizer logic works out correctly, and that, we don't delete things without uninstalling them successfully, right? Like you can't have an installation that is installed and then run a delete and then have the installation fail and us remove the record of that. How do we ensure that we don't do that?
Get into some fun use cases here. So if we delete and the delete fails, you want
No, the
the
uninstall fails.
uninstall fails. Yeah, no, but wait, if we do a delete and the uninstall fails, you still want it to be gone from records. That's what you're
Well,
saying.
maybe, no, I wouldn't want it to be gone from record. And maybe we say you can't delete an installation that is not in a successful uninstalled state. Maybe we say that, right? Like if you want to uninstall an installation, that's an action that you
Mhm.
take against the resource. If you want to delete it, it has to be in an in state, which in this case is successful uninstalled.
Right. And so what I would expect if I did that is that a delete would try and uninstall. And if that uninstall doesn't process, then we get an error.
I would say no. A delete says I am not in an uninstalled successful state. I can't delete.
You want that instead. Oh, so
I don't
yeah, okay.
know. I'm not sure. What's the Porter CLI's behavior right now? Like if you have an installation that's successfully installed and you delete it, does it run the uninstall for that installation and then remove it? Does it just remove the record for it? Like I feel like the Porter CLI should be kind of the source of truth for the behavior, and that's what we should make sure is correct. And then, like Brian said, the operator is just a declarative wrapper essentially around that behavior.
We're getting like close to like, actually, this is an issue that we've surfaced at least twice within the last 4 months that I still haven't dealt with. But we should, installation status, what is it? Status and what is it called? Status and state. There needs to be a matrix of different statuses and states and their meanings, because you can have like defined failed, defined installed, like all of these different words. And that's like a huge thing. I think we even have a PR, or we had a PR, or I was talking to someone about making a PR. My memory is shot. Of making a matrix between state and status. And that could lead us into this like installation. What should we do when we're uninstalling? Like, how should we delete these types of conversations if we had this matrix? So maybe the first step for us creating these types of things is making that matrix of our current use cases. So find that issue. I'm writing it down. And this should be an issue too. Like since this is such a big conversation about like how people use Porter, I would love to take it async, and that way it invites more people, more open discussion. Cool. That's all I have. My takeaways are to, 1, find that matrix issue and post it in Porter chat. 2, make an issue for in the operator of what we expect during install, uninstall versus delete, and like what are the steps we should take and what do users want to see. And then outputs API, I think we're going to have a lot more conversations about, but we need to get that at least moving forward for v1.0. And right now it's really key to remember that the outputs API is internal only. And yeah, what else? Am I forgetting anything? Y'all can call me out.
One thing about the outputs API, and I don't know if you guys talked about it while I was gone, but the key for me is how do we make installations created by the operator usable, right? Like I created an installation, now what? I need to get things out of it. I need to get outputs out of it. So how do we make that usable? And that should be the driving goal behind the solution that we come up with that. Whatever that looks like, that needs to be, how do I use this installation that I just created via the Porter operator?
Okay. That's a good point. Okay. Okay. Does anyone have anything else they want to say before we end the call, or any other issues? Oh, Porter param delete. I forgot already. Alan, if you could make an issue, I'd really appreciate it, with like, here's the command I ran, like I deleted it, and then when I show a list, it's still there, that kind of stuff. I'd really appreciate it. If not, one of us may get to it. I'm gonna write it down. Thank you for just doing it, because it would be like next week by the time I remember. Cool. Also, FYI, there is some internal hubbub that we have like a bajillion CVEs. So if you see me dealing with that, that's what's happening. We're Iron Bank certified, which is so nice. But then they were like, hey, go to 119, has a bunch of CVEs. So my solution to that was to go to 120, which gave us even more CVEs. It was a bad idea. So apparently everyone's upset about our mixins having CVEs. There's just a bunch of drama going on. So if you see a lot of updates or you want to help out with the CVE fun that I'm dealing with, let me know and you can come help. That should be it. I will see you all in 2 weeks. Please, if you need anything, at me in the Porter channel. And yeah, I'll see you all on the internet. Bye. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.
Bye.
Bye.